Chapter 36. Smolder into Dust. Jove. Jove dug out a smoke and his lighter as he and his mother rode through the upper city. The streets were too quiet. Only a few brave souls ventured out into the early evening, probably to drink themselves into denial that the world was changing too quickly for anyone to keep up. First, Cerulene had murdered Stradat Richter and his entire family, and now the Stradat Lord Capitan would hang. The city air smelled of smoke and revolution. His mother looked up with bloodshot eyes as he lit the tip of the cigarette. Her demure black gown and matching cloak reflected Jove's mood. "Is there nothing we can do?" He stuffed the lighter in his pocket and cracked the window using the crank in the door. He took a puff before he responded, "No." "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered. She took in a shaking breath. "I married your father because he promised me a better life, one of freedom from our station. And now I'll have lost nearly everything that means anything to me at all." Jove used the top of the window to knock ashes from his cigarette tip. They tumbled in the breeze as the motorcoach drove through the front gates of Shackley Manor. He didn't say anything as he helped his mother out. She walked to the door where Thora welcomed her inside. Jove didn't follow. Instead, he strode toward the front gate, one hand in his pocket, the other tossing the last of the cigarette onto the cobblestones to smolder into dust. In his memories, the streets ran with blood and ash-laden water. Jove sniffed and fingered another cigarette. He meandered through the upper city, keeping far from the wall. He didn't want to hear the cheers when the wall guard announced that his father would be executed in less than 12 hours. It was a miracle Jove wasn't to hang with him. He found his way into a tavern not far from Mackenzie Square. Only a few patrons sat inside, and Jove took the booth in the far corner. The wood was too hard, the room too silent. He ordered himself a tankard of ale and waited, staring at nothing, counting the seconds until he could get lost in the sweet numbness of alcohol. His father's words still echoed in his head. "I did everything in my power to protect this country, to protect my family. I do not regret my actions." It sounded so noble on the surface until you looked deeper, until you knew the truth. He took a long drink of ale once the barmaid delivered it to the table. His mother, his wife, and his son waited for his return home. Clara would be frustrated that he had chosen to drink away his worries. She meant well, but she didn't understand. She couldn't understand. Raised in a lovely family, where everyone was honest, where everyone was simply kind, Clara had never experienced the trauma Jove suffered. He was thankful for that, but only one person could understand why he sat alone in a near-empty tavern planning to drown himself in ale. Unfortunately, that person was a stars-blasted idiot of a brother. Jove hated that he cared so much. He despised the white-hot pain in his chest when he thought of Kase, of his father, of Anna, of Zeke. How much more could he take? He drank deeply from his tankard. The warring notes of sweet fruits and bitter hops clashed on his tongue. Bliss. The tavern door swung open as Jove sloshed more alcohol down his throat. Someone slid into his booth. The man was built like a politician and dressed to the nines. The scarlet color of his tailored frock coat brought out the warmer, rosy undertones to his umber skin, something Jove would only notice with alcohol beginning to flow in his veins. "Figured I'd find you here," Anderson said, thrumming his fingers on the tabletop. He peeked into Jove's tankard. "And empty. Blazes, mate. You could outdrink a fish." Jove waved at the barmaid, signaling for another. "You come to berate me? Be the father I never had?" Anderson didn't say anything when Jove's next drink was delivered with a prompt thunk, amber liquid and foam sloshing over the side. Jove took a pull. Anderson waited until Jove had replaced the tankard onto the thick tabletop. Then he leaned forward, making sure Jove looked at him. "Your butler sent me to make sure you didn't end up in a ditch. I don't particularly enjoy being your keeper, but I owe you." "For what?" Anderson smiled. "You saved me from predation. Remember that vampire woman who masqueraded as the Silver Coast's head magistrate's daughter?" Jove blinked, trying to think back. "That was years ago, and she wasn't a vampire." "I don't know." Jove's friend leaned back, looking around conspiratorially. "She was too pale even for a white woman, and I swear she had fangs. Noticed them when she ate a prime rib. Rare." "You sound like Kase," Jove shook his head. "And all I did was promise him my dessert if he spilled wine all down her dress." Anderson stole Jove's tankard. After taking a long pull, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "If you survive the night without getting rip-roaring drunk and challenging a disreputable character to a duel, then I've done my duty. It's thanks to you and Kase I'm marrying Miss Lieber instead of someone who can transform into a bat at will." He slid the tankard back over, and Jove took it. "What's to say your betrothed doesn't feast on blood every night? You don't even know her." The barmaid deposited another ale at the table without Jove asking. He pushed it toward his friend. Anderson didn't drink it. "She's as good a match as any." He traced the rim of the tankard. "Not all of us are lucky enough to have a Clara." His wife's soft smile came to his mind. She was probably sleeping by this time, awaiting Samuel to wake once more so she could feed him. "I definitely don't deserve her." "Self-deprecation isn't charming." "I don't. Not after everything. She deserves to be with someone who isn't me." He took another drink, not bothering to wipe the foam from his lip. "She's good. I'm not. At all. Not after being raised by that monster." Anderson looked around once more, sliding out of the booth. He slapped a few gold fivers on the table. "Let's get you home." "No." "Listen." Anderson put one hand on the table, the other on the bench behind Jove, and leaned in, his words coming out as a harsh whisper. "Too many people in this city want your head, even if the High Council has cleared you. My job is to get you home in one piece, so you can stay with your wife and son for a very long time on this stars-forsaken planet. You're not the only one who has had a crappy childhood, so stop playing the martyr." Jove looked up into his friend's dark eyes and saw the turmoil wrestling in their depths. Growing up in an overly privileged home was something many people didn't realize was a burden. Where power and influence abounded, a lack of love and attention followed. Lord Reuben had abused his son in a different way. "Why did you come?" "Because your butler asked me to." "Cut the crap and tell me the truth." Anderson clenched his jaw, breathing deeply. He pulled back, looking off toward the front door. He took a moment before turning back to Jove. "Because I know what it's like to lose a father, particularly one you only wanted to care that you existed." Jove could feel every beat of his sorry heart. Sliding out of the booth, he dug some change out of his pocket. He snatched Anderson's coins from the table and pressed them into his friend's chest. "Then let's go." Jove stomped out of the tavern, his friend following close behind. Night had fallen, and with it the temperature. He shivered in his coat, wishing he'd worn something thicker underneath instead of the thin linen shirt and vest. The streets were still empty. A faint chant came from the direction of the upper gate. Jove couldn't decipher the words. He could still taste the last swig of ale on his breath. He walked in silence up to Mackenzie's Square and across it to the Jayde Center. The glass dome glowed with light from within. He made his way up the stairs. Anderson hadn't said a word in the time they'd left the tavern, but he seemed to know exactly what Jove planned to do, and he would stand by him. Fishing out his identification papers, another roll of parchment fell. The intercepted Cerulene missive he was supposed to break for Hetty. He stuffed it back into the outer jacket pocket. That could wait. He flashed his other papers at the door guard. Anderson copied his movements, and both entered the building. Once inside, Jove marched straight toward the stairs that would take him to the underground levels. His father would be held in the cells reserved for those awaiting their deadly fate. It should be empty, save for the Stradatlord Capitan. Anyone else would be held at the watch station. A few guards milled about. On one of the upper floors, a few followed Stradat Loeffler to stars knew where, probably to take a nap instead of doing something important. The capital was on edge, yet that mattered little to the elderly government leader. Granted, Jove wouldn't want to be holed up with Stradat Sarson discussing policy when she'd finally found a way to take down the Stradatlord Capitan, so he couldn't blame Loeffler for escaping. One of the doors to the west wing opened, and Solder appeared. Just as Jove and Anderson made it to the stairs, the Yalv spotted him. "Master Shackley!" Jove paused, trying not to look annoyed. He had a purpose, and he would not be dissuaded from it by some magic hocus-pocus he didn't care about. He'd also forgotten to ask about Miss Walker with everything going on. The man looked more frazzled than he had during the sentencing that afternoon. His braid was unkempt and his cloak off-kilter. "I need to speak with you." Jove looked at the stairs, at Anderson, and back to the Yalv. "There's something I need to do first." He didn't wait for an answer, only made his way down into the bowels of the Jayde Center. Solder followed. Flashing his papers at the guards at the bottom of the stairs, he entered the holding cells. A subtle scent of mildew permeated the cold, wet air. Jove shivered. The door shut with a clang. A single hanging electric lantern lit the short corridor. Running along the sides were rows of metal bars. No privacy for those awaiting the end. A guard had followed them inside, as if Jove would be stupid enough to do something reckless. Harlan sat, elbows on his knees, on his threadbare cot. Stripped of his medals, of his pride and honor, his hair was a mess, his shirt untucked. He glanced up with wearied eyes as the party approached the door. "Come to say your goodbyes, I see." He stood and walked slowly toward the door. Jove dug his hands into his pockets to keep himself from reaching through bars and clawing his father. "Seems your impending death has brought out your sarcasm." Harlan stopped at the door, his nose only inches from Jove's. They were the same height, same muscular structure. Yet his father looked so much like Zeke in that moment that Jove blinked, shaking his head to rid himself of his dead brother. His breathing picked up. Harlan said nothing. His facial expression didn't change. It was like stone, chiseled and unaffected by time. Only his eyes hinted at his true feelings. Usually full of spite, water lined the edges now. It was almost imperceptible, except to one who'd grown up under their careful watch. "The key." Jove worked his jaw. "Give me the key." The guard hesitated. "I have no authorization to unlock his cell." Jove pulled his hand out of his pocket and held it out. Hetty's parchment fell to the floor. He ignored it. "Give it to me." "Go ahead, Bronson," Harlan said, looking directly at the soldier. "I've accepted my fate." The key was cool in Jove's hand as he unlocked the door. Anderson bent down and grabbed the parchment, but Jove didn't care. The bars of the door were smooth under Jove's fingers as it opened with a loud creak. He stepped inside, his father retreating to give him room. A gesture of respect. Jove thought about spitting at his father's scuffed boots. "What is this?" Anderson asked. Jove didn't look back. "Something for Hetty. Haven't been able to crack it yet." Harlan furrowed his brow. "A code?" "It's Yalvan," Anderson said, his voice soft. Jove turned. "I would have recognized it if so." His friend looked up, his dark eyes curious. It looks like Petra's schoolwork. Solder stepped up. May I? Anderson handed it over. Solder stared at the parchment, his eyes scrunched. It's an old dialect, muddied with a good amount of dead Cerulese. Harlan stepped up to the bars. Can you read it? It's addressed to Owen Christie. It says that he has disobeyed orders, that he has compromised the mission. They are sending his chosen to take the essence of Kase. The parchment dropped from his fingers. Cold shock flooded Jove's veins. He stared at the parchment. He couldn't decipher the letters there, but if what Solder said was true... Anderson cleared his throat. But Christie left last autumn for a sabbatical. Harlan shook his head, his severe face thoughtful. The university deans came up with that lie. They've been searching for him in secret, hoping to find him, but if this is true... This Owen Christie is dead. Solder backed up until he stumbled into the guard, Bronson, who hadn't moved. The soldier caught him. Solder shook his head. The essence power that this speaks of has already passed to the chosen. Jove stared at him hard. What are you saying? Is this the essence you're looking for? Solder's body flickered, but no one noticed except Jove. The essence of Kase has been passed down to the man you know as Ben Rice. He massacred my people, destroyed my home, killed the Lord Elder. Yet he is not the one I seek. No, Harlan spoke quietly. The Cerls are looking for the other one. They're threatening to attack Kaivenna directly to find him, thinking we're hiding him here. What? Jove demanded. I've been meeting with Cerulene defectors in secret. Harlan backed up and eased himself onto his cot, forehead resting in his hands. This was my chance to destroy Cerulene once and for all. Now it's all for naught. Jove merely stared at his father. Meeting with defectors? Had that been the source of the affair rumors? Couldn't he at least have told Jove's mother? Out of all the pain Harlan had inflicted, this one could have been easily resolved by merely trusting his wife. Jove hated him even more. Anderson looked from the soldier to Harlan, to Jove, to Solder. I don't know what you're talking about, but why is this important? What is this essence? Before anyone could answer, the door to the cells opened. Blessed stars, would you keep it down? Stradat Loeffler limped into the corridor, shutting the door behind him, the metal clanging. His usual guard was missing. Why in the blazes is he here? Solder stiffened. Jove gripped the key in his hand. The edges bit into his palm. He looked to his father, who hadn't taken his head out of his hands, to the ancient Stradat, who looked as vigorous as Jove had ever seen him. For once his eyes were alert, focused on the world around him instead of half-closed. Solder shook his head. How? Simple relics, something you should know. Loeffler laughed softly, holding up a bracelet. You can only feel it now because I'm allowing you to. Jove looked between them. When had the two interacted outside of treaty meetings? Because the way they glared at one another suggested a history Jove knew nothing about. What's going on? Loeffler looked toward him with those sleepy brown eyes. No, they weren't brown, they were golden. Jove had never noticed before. Loeffler barely had them open long enough for anyone to take note of their strange color. Solder looked like he'd seen a ghost. His eyes were nearly the exact same shade of brilliant gold as the ancient Stradat's. Loeffler perpetually looked to be in a state of dying. Jove had no clue how old he was. He'd been a Stradat for as long as Jove could remember. Was there a chance that he could be? No, that was ridiculous. Solder stepped forward slowly, one hand going to the pouch at his waist, the pouch where he kept whatever that magic dust was.
He's the essence of spark. Almost.
Loeffler didn't move his eyes from Solder. No one spoke, only stared at the Stradat. There had to be a misunderstanding. Jove had spent countless hours with the man over the course of his career, particularly during his stint as High Guardsman. Shouldn't Jove have known? Felt something? Figured there was more to the man other than the fact he'd passed his prime ages ago? The same could have been said of Owen Christie, who was now dead, his essence power in the hands of Ben Rice. Jove had trusted the latter, sent him on the mission where he'd led the Searles to Mirai and then attacked it months later. A traitor within the Watch. Holy blasting stars.
My father refused to pass the essence power on to me, even if I was his chosen.
Loeffler's hands found the bars of Harlan's cell. It looked as if he needed help to stand.
I took what I could, but it wasn't enough. The rest of my father's essence power was, at last, reborn into a little boy over 2 decades ago. 25 years ago, to be exact. A boy a part of our ancient lineage. Only just. It's taken me years to find him, and at last, fate has blessed me kindly.
25? Jove was 25. Could it be? He looked down at his hands. He stretched out the one that wasn't clenching the key. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary about it. A long scar crossed his palm from the time he and Zeke had tried to pry the sword from the wall above the dining room's mantel. Nothing about his olive skin tone or his history and scars suggested anything other than what they were.
You've known it for some time, haven't you?
Loeffler's voice was soft, sounding much more like the man Jove knew.
Felt the spark beneath your skin.
Jove was about to answer that he hadn't, until he looked up. Loeffler wasn't addressing him. He stared hard at Anderson, who shook his head, but he didn't say anything. His eyes hadn't left the Stradat. No one else moved. No one made a noise, not even Jove's father. Anderson? Jove had never heard him say anything about having Yalvan blood. No, that wasn't right. He'd said something about it at that horrid dinner party. Jove might have been drunk, but he could recall that moment with clarity. Jove, Kase, Anderson, and Hallie had been arguing about the Yalvs wanting to play Grogan. Anderson had been frustrated with the fact that the Yalvs would be taking even more opportunities away from his constituents. He'd felt badly about what they'd been through, especially as I have a bit of Yalvan blood myself, back a few generations. Jove's heart flew into his throat.
I've set everything in motion. Dragamot will come. There is only one thing left.
Loeffler chuckled. You. Without warning, Loeffler lunged, grabbing Anderson by the arm. Several things happened at once. Solder threw his dust in the air, shouting something Jove didn't recognize. Anderson screamed. What looked like a purple lightning exploded from his skin once Loeffler made contact with it. Someone tackled Jove. He fell, cracking his head against the stone floor. The strange lightning hit the guard, Bronson, in the chest. He collapsed. But Jove couldn't do anything. The cell's metal bars glowed an ethereal purple. Then he knew no more. Chapter 37. Little Lark. Hallie. The light in the dungeon's cell had never been warm, yet it played across Hallie's face like a perfect spring day in Kaivenna. Her head weighed too much, her whole body did. She'd slept too long. Why hadn't Caesar and Ajax come to fetch her yet? Not that she wanted them to. She'd rather stay in her cell than face Coria again. Had they brought breakfast yet? Her fingers clenched. The ground beneath her wasn't damp stone. It was soft like a pillow. A bed. A real bed. Stars. Tears seeped out her still-closed lids. It had been so long since she'd last lay in an actual bed. Had it been the inn where she'd danced with the blonde? The one Kase had dubbed Cornhead? How long had that been? 2 weeks? 3? A lifetime ago?
Hallie?
She blinked. The light no longer bled onto grime-ridden walls. This ceiling was white, yellowed with age. Beams of dark oak interrupted the monotony every few feet and climbed up to a point at the tip of the far wall. Blue, red, and yellow lights spangled it as sunlight filtered in from the stained glass window she knew too well. A few tears slid down her cheeks, tickling her ears and falling gracelessly into her hair. This was her room, her old one. Someone squeezed her hand.
Little Lark, can you hear me?
Little Lark. She turned her head. The man who sat in a chair beside her had more gray in his beard than when she'd left Stonesit, and hair still refused to grow upon the top of his head. The window painted colors on it, and half of his face. His golden-brown eyes were glassy with unshed tears, though when Hallie smiled at him a few wayward ones traced the soft lines in his cheeks. Hallie sat up, ignoring the pain as her father moved to the edge of the bed. He pulled her into a hug, his hand smoothing back her hair as if she were 7 once more, and needed comforting after scraping her knee. Her own tears made her head pound even more, but she didn't care. Bits and pieces of the last few days trickled back to her, and with each memory she gripped her father tighter. "Papa, He squeezed her tighter. "I'm so glad you're here." Hallie thought she didn't have any more tears left to cry. It was all she'd done the last few days, especially now that Kase... She gasped, pulling back. She wiped her streaming nose and eyes. "Where's Kase? Is he all right?" Her father held her face between his hands, his calloused thumbs wiping away stray tears.
"He's fine."
Her eyes darted to the sides of the room. "Where is he? I have to make sure. Why isn't he here?" Her father dropped his hands and looked away.
"I'll let him know you're awake."
"Wait, will you stay a little longer?" Because she had to let him know. She had to tell him. He'd never received her letters, and if there was a chance Coria was still alive. "Why are we here?" she asked, pushing herself further up and resting against the wall, a pillow scrunched under the small of her back. She still wore Kase's military jacket, the material bunching around her waist. "Why aren't we in the cavern? If Coria finds us, Papa." Her father didn't sit, only fiddled with his fingers as he swallowed, his throat bobbing with the action.
"We didn't know if you or Kase would wake, or what was wrong. We didn't want to risk... Besides, whatever happened at the fort, your friend hasn't told us much, only that some sort of power was unleashed, allowing you two to escape. Though it was 2 Cerules who brought you to us at the smaller gate. Said they were helping you."
"Cerules helped us?" Hallie's stomach flew into her throat. Her father shrugged.
"We didn't ask questions, only took both you and Kase and got away from Achilles fast as we could."
"What did they look like?"
"Both tall and brawny. The one who seemed to be in charge had curly black hair."
"Caesar and Ajax. They saved us. Are they still here?" Renewed tears bubbled in her swollen eyes. She rubbed them. Her father walked towards the door.
"No."
Maybe they couldn't come with them. Maybe they had to go back to Coria. Maybe they were prisoners like her. Hallie sent up silent words of thanks to the 2 guards. Hopefully they knew. Hopefully she'd get the chance to tell them in person how much she cared. But for now, she'd have to be content. Hallie pulled her knees to her chest as her father turned, his hand on the knob.
"We'll move to the cabin in the morning, once you've rested some more. We can talk more there."
"Papa," Hallie said, her voice muffled by her knees. "Did you know we're Yalvan?"
He froze.
That's why they wanted me." Her voice choked on the last words. She cleared her throat and squeezed her knees tighter. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep it from me?" His hand slipped from the doorknob, but he didn't face her.
"It's a burden I didn't want you to bear."
Hallie's face heated. "That's not fair." Her father's only answer was silence. His shoulders slumped. Maybe this wasn't the best time to have this conversation. Maybe she should have waited until she'd gotten to the cavern. But she was so tired. She was so tired of being lied to, of being kept in the dark. She was no longer a little lark afraid to fly. "If you'd told me, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Any of it."
"I'm sorry."
He didn't say anything other than that, only grasped the knob once more and turned it, opening to someone in the doorway. The first thing she noticed were the tousled, windswept, tawny curls, which stuck out even more as he ran a hand through them. His blue eyes met hers. Small, inconsequential cuts decorated part of his face. Her heart lurched. "Kase!" Her father moved aside to let him in and swept out after, shutting the door with a soft thump. Kase had barely moved beyond the door itself. He looked ragged and worn, if slightly cleaner than he had been in Achilles. His white shirt was too tight around his arms, showing the muscles there as he pushed the hair out of his face, though his eyes didn't leave the floor. The sunset outside had finally faded, leaving them in the onset of evening. Stars, Hallie didn't like this side of Kase at all. "Why don't you sit?" Hallie's voice was rough, her throat raw from smoke. She settled herself against the wall behind her, trying not to wince at the pain in her head. "You must be nearly as beat as—" But she trailed off as he sat gingerly in the chair, still refusing to look at her. She turned the gas lantern on her bedside table to its lowest setting. The golden light added a little color to Kase's ashen skin. The silence grew thicker and thicker, like the smoke and flames from the fort. The flames had caught on the back of Kase's shirt when she'd woken up, but Ajax had doused them with his jacket. She vaguely remembered Kase passing out, and both of them being caught by Caesar below. But everything after that was a blur of loud noises and voices and shapes, until she'd passed out herself. Why had there been flames? Something had happened with the Lord Elder. Was that the reason for the inferno? Why had Caesar and Ajax helped them? "So this was your room?" Kase's voice was soft, like he was afraid if he spoke too loudly he would break. "I expected more books." He pulled at the cuffs of his shirt, which ended past his elbow. Hallie swallowed. "The only book I owned went with me to Yalvara. Most of what I read belonged to the schoolhouse." She played with a stray thread in the bedsheets. "Where did you get this shirt? It's a little too small for you." "Yeah." He looked down at it and then back up to her. "It was the only shirt I could find around here. Niels only just returned with my pack, but I wanted to see you before—" He coughed. "My other one, the fire—" He stopped, his words choking off, before he took a deep breath again. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lose control like that. The flames coming toward me and the whole fort coming down around us." "Kase, look at me," Hallie whispered. He took a second or two before slowly raising his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. She chewed her lip. "You have nothing to be sorry about. If I hadn't been so stupid as to believe that telegram, if I'd only done something, anything else besides drag us all the way out here, then we wouldn't be in this mess. If anyone's to be sorry, it's me." Kase turned away, running both hands through his hair, tugging at the ends. "I was ready to die at the end, only to be given a chance I nearly ruined because of my stupid blasting weakness. When the fire burned toward us, my mind took me back to the Kaivenna fire. He sounded like he was barely holding back tears. All I could see were the flames and that stupid cigarette and Anna. And he inhaled sharply. I'm as useless as my father says I am. Hallie's head shot up. Kase! She moved to the edge of the bed and grabbed his hand. He looked at her, tears clinging to his long lashes. She took his other hand, making him face her completely, and squeezed them. I only know what you've told me about your father, but... She took a deep breath. But you're far from useless. You're the best man I know. I'm not. Kase looked at their entwined hands and shook his head. I've done awful things, horrible things. Hallie pulled her right hand out of his grasp and brushed his cheek. You're human. We make mistakes, but it's how we fix them that reveals our true selves. She smiled when his eyes met hers. If the Lord Elder hadn't responded, you'd be dead, and Achilles would still be in Cerulene's control with me as their tool. But you gave me the strength to force the Lord Elder to unleash his full power. You saved us, and once again you saved me. Though for how long, I don't know. Kase squeezed her other hand. But what do we do next? If they've attacked Kaivenna... He cleared his throat. If there's anyone left, someone has to warn Jove and the Watch about everything. Coria, King Philip, the Essences. Hallie wouldn't be going back to Kaivenna any time soon. She didn't think she'd even make it through the pass. I'm scared, Kase. A knock echoed on the door. Hallie looked up, dropping Kase's hand. Come in. Her father returned, a wooden chest in his arms. Hallie studied it for a moment, trying to piece together where she'd seen it before. The faded pattern along the bottom and the dust coating most of the outside betrayed its age. It was the same one she'd found years ago, but was unable to pick the lock. I should have let you read these earlier. Her father paused, his mustache twitching. But I didn't want to burden you, especially after everything with Jack. He set the chest at the end of the bed and fished a key from his pocket. Our family history isn't a happy one, and my mama would only let me read a few entries. I didn't care because Gran died when I was 7, and the end of her life wasn't pretty. I didn't want to know what she went through. Maybe it was cowardly of me, but anyway, here. The key he held was unlike anything Hallie had ever seen before, too jagged and small. It was also made from zuprium. He unlocked the chest and stared at the contents. These are Gran's journals from when she first left her people. Hallie crawled to the foot of the bed, peeking over the top to find 3 leather-bound books, each cracking with age and kept closed with twine. She grabbed the top one and stared at the cover. It was simple, nothing to delineate what it was or who it had belonged to, but even then it radiated with mystery, and something that made Hallie's fingertips tingle. The image of a glowing mountain door flashed in her vision. Warmth flooded her chest. The Lord Elder. What does it mean? Silence. The chair creaked as Kase stood. We can talk later. Hallie blinked and looked up to find her father gone. Kase was heading toward the door. She set the book down. It's okay if you stay. Kase put his hands in his trouser pockets and shook his head. Nils needs a break from watch duty. We don't know if Coria and the others made it out, but we shouldn't let our guard down. She understood, but that didn't stop disappointment from settling on her shoulders. Kase shut the door behind him without looking back. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself before turning back to the book in her lap. With careful hands, she unwound the twine holding the journal shut, opened it to the first page, and began to read in the dim lantern light. Father and the called knew as soon as I was born that I, Yalvara of Mirai, would be chosen. They say the day was cause for celebration, knowing that the power of the essences would continue, that when the end of time came, we would be ready. But I never wanted the power. I still don't believe Taro cares about me, a chosen Yalvan girl who only wanted to leave as soon as I knew a whole different world existed beyond the city of my birth. I wanted to truly live. Father didn't understand at first, when he took the essence of time from his mother. He didn't understand the burden it placed upon him, upon all of Yalvara. The power to unwind time is the most powerful of them all, yet it is also the most painful. I still remember the day I told him I didn't want to take on his essence. I was 13, and had sat through a lecture where I learned of my eventual fate. I sprinted away before Colonel Edwir finished teaching, his shouts and curses trailing me, but I was faster. I found Father in the great hall, and, even though I was too old to cry, soaked his embroidered robes with my tears. The night of my chosen ceremony, where I would take on Father's essence at the age of 16, I ran. Pressing his relic, his timepiece with the carving of Mirai on the cover, into my shaking hands, Father sent me through the passage he created. He was the only one who could. Chapter 38. I Know. Hallie. Night was in full swing by the time Hallie left her room. She hadn't read much further in Yalvara's journals. The weight of those first words resonated too deeply. Yalvara had been only 16 when she'd given up her destiny. 16 when she'd run away from home. 16 when she'd unknowingly sealed Hallie's fate nearly a century later. Yalvara had gained her freedom only to imprison her great-granddaughter, yet Hallie couldn't blame her. She would do nearly anything to rid herself of the burden now on her shoulders. After changing into some clean old clothes from her dusty wardrobe, she made her way on stockinged feet down the stairs and into the kitchen. The image of the glowing archway flashed in her mind once more. Yalvara had spoken of a passage that she'd taken from Mirai, one the Lord Elder had created. Was it the same? Warmth pulsed from her chest. The Lord Elder. He was trying to tell her something. Was it that she had to find this archway? Another pulse. Salder's voice came back to her from what felt like an eternity ago in Kaivenna. And if there is a way to separate the two, the knowledge is lost in the great library of Mirai. She pushed the door open to the kitchen with a shaking hand. Someone had set a gas lantern in the hearth. In front stood 3 men entangled in a heavy discussion. The one on the far right was her father. On the other side stood Kase, the lantern light tracing his profile, making her heart stutter. But the figure in the center caused it to stop. Niels. His hair had grown since she'd last seen him, but his accent was still just as thick. "Not to be disrespectful, sir, but we need you here." His father rubbed his beard. "Lenora can handle anything while I'm gone. She's a decent apprentice, but you and I both know how flighty she can be." Kase had changed into one of his own shirts, complete with a vest. Hallie relaxed a little. Seeing him in Jack's shirt earlier had been a shock. Not Kase's fault, but a shock nonetheless. He laced his hands behind his neck. "I need someone to get me through those tunnels quickly. Stowe is my best bet." "And I told Zelda I'd be along to help her find our girl soon as I thought Lenora was ready." Niels fell onto the low couch behind him with a defeated sigh.
All right. But what if Hallie isn't ready to travel yet? I'm sure a few rounds of my tonic will set her up right while we travel, her father said.
The image of the archway appeared again, followed by a weak pulse. She backed away from the men, but the movement caught Kase's eye at last. He smiled a little. Good to see you up. The words cradled her like an embrace. The Kase from earlier was gone for now. Her father turned, but the muscles in Niels's back scrunched. Hallie's heart hammered in her chest as she joined them. She took the chair next to Kase, who still stood in front of the lantern. Niels looked anywhere but at her. Her father coughed.
Don't know how much you heard, but we're hoping you'll be up to a trip soon. We need to find your mama.
Hallie intertwined her fingers together. I'm not going back to Kaivenna. Every eye was on her, and heat rose to her cheeks. Kase's hand flinched. Her father sat next to Niels, his eyes earnest and searching.
You haven't recovered yet, I know, but I have some...
It's not that. I need to find the passage Yalvara used. Barring me traveling all the way to Tassava on a hover ship, the only way I'm getting to Mirai is through that. That's what the Lord Elder wants.
Lord Elder? Her father asked.
Niels kept staring into the floor like it was about to catch fire. Kase's voice was quiet as he spoke.
Do you even know where that is?
She looked up and searched his eyes, willing him to understand something she didn't quite comprehend herself. All I know is that it's in the Nardens. I can find it with the Lord Elder's help. Her father shook his head.
I'm not losing you again.
The heat in her body rose, even with her trying to tamp down her emotions. The Lord Elder could only handle so much. She didn't want what happened to Achilles to happen here. You need to go to Mama. I need to find the passage. It's the only way to figure out what's going on.
What if you're walking into a trap?
Kase sat on the arm of her chair.
Just because Courier hasn't shown up here doesn't mean he can't find you.
She'd tried to kill Courier, but it seemed her power clashed with his and brought the fort down. That was the only explanation she had for what happened. What if Kase was right? What if Courier survived and was looking for her now? She didn't have it in her to fight in her current state. Hallie clenched her hands tighter. Her knuckles bled to white. I don't know what to expect, but after reading the journal, it's what I need to do. She owed it to herself, Yalvara, and the Lord Elder to try. Are you sure? Kase asked. I'm not changing my mind. Hallie released her hands and grabbed one of Kase's, squeezing it. I think the journals and searching the library in Mirai could help me, and maybe even Ben. How do you know? Hallie shrugged. I don't, but my gut tells me this is the right thing to do. Kase chewed his cheek as he held her hand fast. But I have to go to Kaivenna. I know. Niels's voice was soft, yet firm.
I'll go with you, Hals. If we don't find anything, we'll go to Kaivenna.
But, her father started, but Niels interrupted.
I know these mountains better than anybody.
He tapped his thumbs together, purposefully refusing to make eye contact with anyone else.
If Hal thinks there's something there, then I believe her. Then I'll go too, her father said, standing.
He was an impressive figure against the backdrop of the dark kitchen with only the gas lantern for light. I need you to take me through the mine tunnels. You're the only one who can, Mr. Walker, Kase said. Her father sighed and pulled Hallie out of her chair and into a hug. He held her tightly.
Come back to me, you hear?
He released her and brushed stray hair from her eyes.
We'll leave first thing in the morning. Let's get you both a good night's rest.
He headed up the stairs. Niels rose.
I'll take first watch.
And then he was off too. He hadn't looked at her once during the entire conversation, not a single time. Yet he wanted to come with her to find something she wasn't sure even existed any longer. She looked over at Kase, who stepped around her and fell into the seat Niels had vacated. He laid his head against the back and stared straight up at the cedar-beamed ceiling. "I don't like you going off without me." She slid beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. He snaked an arm around her waist, and she cuddled closer. "We don't have a choice." "You do." She closed her eyes against the budding frustration. "Salder said something about the library in Mirai possibly holding answers. There's something in the ruins that can help. I've heard of Jagamat, but he's only mentioned in passing in all the texts we have at home. Same with the essence powers." Kase leaned his cheek on the top of her head. "Promise me that if you don't find anything, you'll come to Kaivenna, if it's even still standing. Knowing you, I'll have to break you out of jail again." He chuckled as he kissed her temple. They sat and talked in front of the light from the gas lantern until Hallie could barely keep her eyes open. She didn't want to leave him, but she knew that when morning broke, the stars would certainly fall. Kase. The morning came all too early for Kase's liking. With the knowledge that Hallie would be with Niels for stars knew how long, sleep evaded him. It was Cornhead from Laurent all over again, except this time there was history between them. But she was right. He was needed in Kaivenna, not gallivanting about the mountainside looking for something that probably no longer existed. He rubbed his eyes and pushed himself onto his elbows. He and Hallie had stayed up for hours talking about everything, except what awaited them the next day. Now the goodbye he'd dreaded for weeks was finally here, and it was much worse than he'd anticipated. But he had a duty. He could no longer run from his problems. He needed to face them head-on and save what was left of Jayde. He made sure his pack was prepared and headed downstairs. They'd make their way to the Stones' cavern together, and then Kase and Stowe would go through the tunnels. He was the last one down. Stowe and Hallie argued in whispers by the door, and Niels sat on the couch, watching them with interest. It was a shame Kase liked Niels. The way he was looking at Hallie made Kase's blood boil. Of course, when Kase finally had a girl to take home to his mother, he would have stiff competition. "We'd better head out," Kase said as he joined the others. Hallie and her father paused, and she met Kase halfway. With a small smile, she took his hand and gave it a squeeze. He held her hand fast, her affection giving him confidence. Niels rose from the couch and stretched, yawning. Kase hated how muscular he was. "We should take the hidden passage just in case," Niels said. They left the little inn and headed into the dawn. The sky had surrendered to a light gray as they entered the cottage that hid the tunnel. Stowe led the way down, and Niels brought up the rear. No one spoke as they traveled. Kase's hand was cold without Hallie's inside it. With each step they took, Kase's stomach filled with dread. He and Hallie had been through a lifetime together the last few weeks, and yet they would go their separate ways. He couldn't stop thinking about that, about how he was about to lose her, possibly forever. Shucks, he was 3 seconds away from taking her hand and running away from all their problems. They could go to Tevrubica and watch the world burn. She might even say yes. That was what kept Kase from following through with that idea. At long last, they reached the end of the tunnel and entered the cavern. Even at this early hour, people milled about, the early vestiges of sunrise lightening the darker spaces. Several children ran to Hallie, cascading into her knees, hands flying around her waist. She laughed along with them. Kase couldn't help the smile traipsing across his face. She would make a great mother one day. "Are you here to stay, Miss Hale? We sure missed you reading to us," one little boy asked, his gap-toothed grin betraying his age of no more than probably 11. Hallie just laughed, promising to read the children a story that night by the campfire, if anyone had a book she could borrow. Niels helped peel the children off her. He playfully chased a few of them, their laughter echoing off the stone. Hallie fell back to Kase, tucking herself under his arm. "Didn't realize how much I was missed." Kase gave her shoulders a light squeeze. As they should. He didn't dare say anything else, for fear he unleashed all the thoughts in his head. They would only make the next event of the morning even more difficult. They reached Stowe's campsite, where the man busied himself with packing all sorts of tonics, salves, and poultices. A few more people came and spoke with Hallie and Niels. Kase hovered nearby, feeling very much out of place. Too soon for Kase's liking, Stowe finished his packing, and the residents of Stoneset went their separate ways. It was here. The goodbye. They all walked to one of the cave entrances. The distant hills and village ruins were slowly illuminated by the light coming over the mountains. Kase chewed the inside of his cheek as Hallie turned to him, tears budding in her eyes. Stowe and Niels stood a little apart to give them some privacy. That didn't mean they weren't watching out of the corners of their eyes. Hallie twisted her fingers in the hem of her untucked, lacy shirt. She still wore his stolen military jacket. "I guess you'll be off? How do you know where you'll be going?" A soft breeze blew wayward strands of her hair about her face. She hadn't put it in a lady's bun since before Achilles. Kase found he liked her long braid. She tugged at the end. "We'll stay here a few days while I read through the rest of the journals. I'm sure something's in there that'll help." Kase tried burying the jealousy that reared its head at that. She was doing something important and would follow him soon after. At least that's what he told himself. "I have something for you." Kase slid his pack off, digging through it until the smooth surface of his pilot goggles met his fingers. He pulled them out before shouldering the pack once more. "I'm not sure you'll take good care of these after all the times you've mocked me." She gave a choked laugh. "And the only time I flew a hover, I crashed." Kase felt the stares of both Hallie's father and Niels as he laughed. "Talk to me once you've crashed twice on the same mission." They stood in silence for a few more moments before Hallie's tears spilled over. "Will you not come with me?" With a quick look at her father and Niels, he threw caution to the wind and pulled her in close. She folded into his embrace, burying her face into his borrowed jacket. He murmured his next words into her hair. "I'm the only one who has an inkling of what the souls want with the essences. Your job is to figure out exactly what that is." She stepped back, her eyes desperate. "But what if I can't? What if I lose myself again?" "You won't." "You can't know that." "I do." Kase placed the goggles atop her head and clasped the strap. They didn't mess up her hair like they did his. He grabbed both sides of her face so she wouldn't miss a single word. "Because you're Hallie Walker, stubborn as the stars, and the one who'll save us all." He wiped the tears cascading down her face. She smiled through them. "We'll find each other." The words were ragged with her breathing. "When this is over." He slid his hands from her cheeks, down her shoulders, her arms, lacing his fingers with hers. "I promise." With one last squeeze, for fear he might lose the will to leave for Kaivenna, he dropped her hands and turned away. His footsteps were heavy, like his boots were crafted of stone. He'd reached her father when he peeked back one last time to watch as she disappeared from view. Yet she stood there, smiling through her tears, eyes yearning. His goggles had slid sideways. He didn't tell himself that he was only making it harder for him to leave, only dropped his pack and sprinted back toward her. She met him halfway. He scooped her into his arms and captured her lips with his. Electricity zipped through his body as she wrapped her arms around his neck. All he wanted was to drown in that moment, forget the outside world existed. His goggles fell from her hair and onto the cave floor below. She laughed against his lips. He pulled back to look her in the eyes. "I love you," he whispered as he set her back onto the ground, saying the words he'd spoken only once before, when he'd found himself facing the end. She wiped her eyes and nodded. "I know." Turned out, Kase also lacked romances fraught with space, laser swords, and overarching empires. He laughed, kissing her again, focusing solely on the woman in his arms. Hours later, as he and Stowe wound their way through the caves, he would remember and take heart. They would be together at the end of it all. He would make sure of it. For the first time in his life, he had hope. Chapter 39. His Brother's Courage. Clara. Every fiber of Clara's being ached, even though it had been days since giving birth. Samuel was the perfect baby. He smelled like rain and sugar and something she couldn't quite describe. He cried only in moments when he needed something and slept well most of the time. Yet Clara still hurt. In the early hours after her son's birth, Jove had returned to the room reeking of drink when he'd promised he'd stop. Clara tried to understand. She'd warred with herself, saying that it was no wonder her husband only wanted to drown out the pain he felt inside. But she couldn't. She could only be so strong. Her son needed a whole father, not one drowning in alcohol and grief. Les had returned from Harlan's sentencing hours before and locked herself in her chambers. Her sobs trickled through the walls. Jove had yet to appear. Tears burned her eyes as she packed up everything she'd need. She stuffed baby clothes and blankets into the leather pack Lizzie had fetched from the townhouse. Clara needed a few weeks at the Davy family estate. She needed to heal herself before she could heal her husband. She'd meet her mother outside the city gates. They'd catch a motor coach to Crystal Fell and be home within a week. Clara wasn't strong enough to stay. The words she'd penned onto parchment an hour ago mocked her from the bedside table. Jove, we've gone to Crystal Fell. Don't come until you're ready. Clara. Hopefully he'd be able to read her words through the tear-smudged ink. She wondered how soon he would drink himself into oblivion. She should have known she couldn't be strong enough for them both. Tucking the ends of the blanket around her 2-week-old son, the ache in her chest radiated down her arms. She squeezed her eyes shut and breathed deeply, relaxing her muscles with each exhale. In seconds that felt like an eternity, the pain receded. She would be okay. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Jove would finally realize what was right in front of him, that he didn't need alcohol to feel happy. Maybe he would follow her, and all her pain would be for naught. After slipping the leather pack onto sore shoulders, Clara picked up her slumbering son. He hadn't cared that his mother had swaddled him, only snuggled deeper into the blanket. She pressed the baby to her chest, taking in his scent and soft grunts of sleep. With a swift glance at the room and the bassinet, she stepped toward the door. There was something else in the bassinet, tucked away on the side as if forgotten. She paused. Had it always been there? She laid Samuel on the rumpled bedsheets. Her fingers picked up the pin, blood-speckled, dusty, with the shape of the Jaydian symbol of a tree surrounded by a sun. The small ribbon below was just as filthy. Lieutenant Colonel Ezekiel Shackley graced the front in tiny letters no bigger than the tip of her fingernail. She glanced toward the letter resting on the bedside table. The inked words watched her, judged her. With careful fingers, she attached the pin to Samuel's bundle, and then she left. Babe in her arms, pack on her back, she was done being strong. She only hoped Jove could find his brother's courage. Epilogue. The Essence of Kase. Jove. Jove woke to screams, darkness, and burning on the side of his face. A murmured song with words he didn't recognize floated in the air. He brought his hand to the side of his face, but someone grabbed it. The singing also stopped. "The Vasa has nearly finished its work, Master Shackley." His jaw ached something fierce, but the burning was worse. He opened his eyes to find Solder and his father sitting beside him. There was a golden light radiating from Jove's face. He blinked. The lantern hanging from the ceiling had gone out. The golden light faded, and Jove sat up. His father's fingers were glowing too. Solder put away his pouch. "Is there anywhere else you're hurting?" Jove shook his head, amazed he no longer felt any pain. He touched his jaw. "Your magic?" "Not magic. A gift from Toro." Harlan's fingers dimmed at last. He looked at the cell bars, which were still emanating purple light. "And what in the blazes was that?" "Unbridled power of an essence, second only to that of the Lord Elder." Solder stood, helping Jove up, then Harlan. "The essence of spark has been missing for nearly 900 years, and to think that it was split. May Toro have mercy on our souls." Solder strode from the cell, careful not to touch the glowing bars. Jove stared after him, unsure of what to make of his claim or the fact he'd used magic to heal him and his father. And what about Anderson being an essence? Where was the man? Judging by the shouts and screams, Loeffler was currently terrorizing people above. Was he with him? He could do nothing against that power. He rubbed his jaw again. Who'd saved him from getting blasted by that lightning? Harlan stretched his hand, not saying a word. His father? Had he been the one to tackle him? Jove swallowed. There couldn't have been anyone else, yet Jove still didn't want to believe Harlan could have done something like that to protect him. It was out of character. Solder knelt beside the guard, splayed a few feet outside the cell. Harlan squatted next to them, his fingers searching for a pulse in the man's neck. "Dead?" "Yes," Solder whispered. "Killed by the power of a god." Jove's father cursed, his fingers clenching. "This is what I was trying to prevent by sending the Eudora Jayde to your people." His voice was low and dripping with spite. "Now that thing is loose, and it's kidnapped a future city councilman." Solder stood as Harlan closed the eyes of the guard, setting his hands across his chest. His father unbuckled the man's sword from his belt. "I will treat this with the respect it deserves." He tucked it inside his own belt. "If he has indeed brought about the end, Jagamont, then we must hasten to stop him. The prophecies—" Solder flickered. When he solidified, he took a deep breath. "The prophecies state all essence wielders must give their lives to stop the end, as they are the slivers of Toro shattered in the dawn. The only way to prevent the utter destruction of Yalvara is unite the essence powers as one once more." "Karsi Vasi. We are one." "One world? Are they working for the souls, the Yalvs?" Harlan barked, echoing Jove's thoughts. Solder wrung his hands. "I do not know. But we have spent too long down here. We must go above. I am one of the few who may be able to stop the essence of spark. Any other solutions are lost to the ruins of Mirai." "Then let's go," Jove said, pushing past them both and heading out of the holding cells. He didn't know what they were going to do, but Saulder still had that magic dust. Jove was still unsure of its power. Not that he cared, only that it worked. They could worry about the end of the world, or whatever Loeffler had set into motion, afterward. No one awaited them outside the door. The remaining guards were gone, the corridors dark. Light from First Moon and what looked like fire filtered in through the windows, allowing them to see dimly. Nothing glowed purple out here, but the lanterns hanging from the ceiling were dark. Jove didn't have time to stop and check on anyone who might be dead in the shadows. The only reason he was still alive was because his father had tackled him. That fact stood out in his mind. If there hadn't been a crazed old man wielding ancient power on the loose, Jove might have been amazed at his father's heroics. But, alas, they needed to find Loeffler and Anderson before more people suffered. Loeffler didn't seem to be working for the Cerulens, but Jove wasn't sure. The group entered the foyer to mass chaos. People were everywhere, torches in hand. Soldiers clashed with the populace, swords and blood flashing in the firelight. Jove froze. Neither Loeffler nor Anderson were anywhere to be seen, but the sheer size of the mob made it nearly impossible to tell. Where had they all come from, anyway? Wasn't the upper gate closed? A shot of cold went through Jove. The electricity. The gate ran on electricity. None of the lanterns were working. Saulder said Loeffler possessed whatever powerful magic the Yalvs wielded. The electricity was out, just like it had when the first settlers had landed on Yalvara. Could it be? Could Loeffler's essence be the one? Holy blasting, crashing stars!
Kase Vasi!
The people chanted, the surlees echoing off the walls. One world. Jove stumbled back into Saulder and his father.
The gates failed. Loeffler's power destroyed the electricity. We need to get out of here before...
Saulder blinked out of existence and reappeared on the other side of Jove, throwing a cloud of dust at their would-be attacker. The man, who was dressed in a bloody apron, cleaver raised above his head, froze as soon as the dust landed. Jove dragged his father away, Saulder following behind, breathing heavily. Harlan wrenched out of Jove's grip and led them down into the dungeons they'd left, making turns at random. Voices and footsteps followed. Any slip-up and they'd be butchered. The pouch at Saulder's waist was only so big.
"This way!"
Harlan shouted as he flung open a wooden door and descended the stairs behind it. Jove allowed Saulder to go in front of him before he slammed the door shut, locking it. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy them time. At the top of the stairs they found another door. Harlan opened it just as their pursuers hit the one at the bottom. The banging was amplified by the narrow stone walls. Harlan, Saulder, and Jove burst through the top door into an alleyway and the open air that smelled of smoke. The city was burning. It seemed one world had succeeded in their mission.
"You don't think—"
Jove started, the flames reaching toward the sky, reminding him of all he held dear. He didn't finish his sentence, only took off toward Shackley Manor. He'd left Clara and Samuel there, his mother.
"Jove!"
Jove barely heard his father over the sound of his own heartbeat. The crushing in his lungs battled with the abject terror taking over his mind. He'd left them alone. Alone. Because he'd wanted to go out and drink himself into a stupor after the sentencing. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he sprinted toward his childhood home. So lost in his goal he didn't see the blue fire as it zinged through the air, cascading into his shoulder. He screamed, flying forward and skidding on the cobblestones. White-hot pain lanced out from his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt. He couldn't move.
"You blasted helveter!"
someone growled. Jove peeked up through his pain to find his father brandishing the dead soldier's sword. He sliced at the man holding a jagged-barreled, smoking pistol. Not an electropistol, a Cerul weapon. Holy stars! The attacker lost his arm to Harlan's sword, the pistol tumbling from the disembodied hand. The man's gurgling scream was cut short by Harlan's next thrust. The pistol slid to Jove, who grabbed it in his good hand and pushed himself to his knees, cocking the weapon and firing it at the other three men careening toward them. They dove out of the way. avoiding the fiery blue bullets. Solder appeared beside him, pressing dust into Jove's wound.
"I don't have enough to heal it, but I can... I can..."
He flickered again and wavered, falling to his knees. Dust stuck to his bloody fingers and smeared on his forehead as he wiped it.
"I can't..."
Harlan finished off the other men, whom Jove had missed with his terrible aim. He wiped blood from his blade, his eyes hard and emotionless in the raging firelight.
"Clara, Samuel, Mother..."
Jove fought to stand, the pain in his shoulder reaching a crescendo, nearly bringing him to his knees once more. Above the crackling of the burning mansions, the sound of the populace still chanting one world's slogan, and the death screams, a roar rent the air. Guttural, ear-splitting, bone-shaking. Jove looked to the sky. Lit by the fires, the underbelly of an immense beast flew over them. Wind rushed through Jove's short hair. Scales glittered gold, talons reflected orange. The snout was long and large enough to swallow a man whole. Atop the beast sat a man with light blonde hair.
"The essence of Kase,"
Solder's voice overflowed with anguish. Jove knew the man. He'd been a regular at state dinners when Kase hadn't wanted to come alone. Yet his brother had assured him that he'd died, perished on the mission Jove had sent him on, only to be resurrected by the secrets Solder had spilled to him mere hours before. The man astride what Jove could only describe as a dragon was Ben Rice. Jove fell to his knees again. He could do no more but watch as the beast reached the Jade Center. A fiery torrent blasted from the dragon's great maw and slammed into the glass dome from above, engulfing it. The last thing Jove saw was the explosion of glass as the dome shattered. The end. To be continued in Book 3, Swords of Soul and Shadow. The end. We hope you have enjoyed this production of Realms of Wrath and Ruin, written by Ali Ernest, narrated by Magnus Carlsen, published by Dragon Page Entertainment. Recorded books are available wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to Recorded Books. This book and production copyright 2024 by Ali Ernest.